Welcome to HP FanFiction. Support me by subscribing the channel. Also, like and share the video to keep me motivated to make more videos like these. If you three have the chance to visit the infirmary tonight, can you? Yeah, Harry, said Neville. We can. I'd best hie off to the Ravenclaw common room then, he said. Good night. Good night, said the other three, plus a few others, especially Gryffindors. In the common room, one of his housemates was just starting on getting into bollocksing him out for losing them 100 points as he walked in through the door, when Harry flared his magic and glared back at the fourth year. Parchment and other loose objects in about a 20-foot radius of him leapt into the suddenly swirling air as his magic poured out of him. The fourth year rapidly dove out of the way in fear and intelligently kept his mouth firmly shut. Harry continued to glare at the older boy as he allowed his magic to quickly subside. Do not allow yourself to continue thinking you are permitted to speak to me that way, he quietly said. Harry continued to glare at the boy for another few moments before he walked off down the passageway to his dorm room. Behind him, he heard a sixth-year prefect say, "Wilson, you're an idiot. We had no chance of winning the House Cup, so the loss of points was irrelevant. And for what the student body, this house included, has put that boy through for the past 8 months, I think we can allow him to lose his temper about it, don't you?" Harry quickly collected a reasonably long roll of parchment, usually used for long assignments, ink and a couple of quills, and brought them back to the common room. Finding himself a vacant study carousel, a rare commodity this time of year, he took seat and placed his stationery on the desk before him. Getting comfortable, he closed his eyes and set about laying out in his mind what he wanted to write. A great way to not waste parchment, ink and quills. When he was ready, he took care and began to write in as legible a hand as he could. This would not be about speed in getting the information down. This was about making the information easy to read, and he was taking his time with it. The truth about the published works of the fraud known as Gilderoy Lockhart. He included it all. He gave page references in each of the books. Lockhart forced them to purchase through the school book lists, plus Magical May, where the information conflicted. Using the house library, I looked up each method of defeating the evil Lockhart was supposed to have used, and where the result was not possible, identified why. Then he started on how Roy Ackgild was Gilderoy, and how Gild was the author of the so-called factual stories of the life of Harry Potter. Of course, the house library had more than one full set of those books donated by previous students from which he could reference. With room to spare, he moved on to the life of Lockhart, including his Hogwarts ODUL results. Lockhart did not sit his nukes, as he did not receive a single outstanding and only 2 exceeds expectations in Muggle studies and divination. Harry grinned when he remembered Cygnus's note with that information within it, and what Cygnus wrote in his own words. His disgust was quite clear. He wrote about how no record existed for the man's claimed Order of Merlin, 3rd class, and that the Dark Force Defense League only existed on parchment. Parchment which stated Lockhart had set the organization up himself. Another piece of information Cygnus sent him by way of Sirius was that the records of competitors of the Dunstable Dueling Championship did not show the name Gilderoy Lockhart, Roy E. Gild, or even Roy Gild in their past 25 years since Lockhart left Hogwarts. So he included that. While he had been writing, he was visited by Professor Flitwick, who informed him the punishment assigned by Professor Snape for him had been overturned and no further punishment would be leveled against him. Also that Malfoy had received a stern lecture from Professor McGonagall, complete with the warning that he, Harry, was well within his right to just kill him, and that was precisely what he, Harry, had promised to do if it happened again, and that Malfoy was having the 100 points taken off Slytherin House, together with the detention with Filch for the remainder of the school year, since that is what Professor Snape considered a valid punishment. The fact Professor Flitwick said she said it in front of Professor Snape without even glancing at the man amused Harry as much as it seemed to amuse Professor Flitwick. Returning to his written rant, he questioned why Dumbledore would hire such a man for the important post of Professor of Defense against the Dark Arts, when he was clearly unsuited for the role, and that Dumbledore had clearly failed in his duty of care to the school by vetting Lockhart's application for the post. And finally, he recommended everyone keep their Lockhart and Guild books, instead of burning them, return them by hand to the bookshops from which they purchased them, and demand an unconditional refund. His spleen now well vented, Harry almost packed away his things and went to bed. He was going to make hundreds of copies of his written runt and leave a copy on each place at the 4 house tables and the head table in the Great Hall, very early the next morning. However, he felt his penmanship still showed through and would quickly identify him as the author. Instead, he pulled out his order form for Flourish and Blots and found where it said he could order a dicta quill and ordered one to be owled to him. Though it was late, Hedwig was out hunting. She immediately aborted her hunt and flew to the Ravenclaw tower. As apology, Harry handed the owl 2 owl treats and let her finish them before attaching the order form to the owl's harness. "There's no rush for this, Ed," he whispered to her. "Take your time flying to Diagon Alley, and you can stay there until you're ready to return." With a final kiss to her head, he sent her on her way. Harry spent almost the entire next day, Sunday, in the infirmary, and only left when Madame Pomfrey would shoo him out to get meals or just sunshine, since the snow was well and truly melted away and the days were warming up. After spending time with Daphne, he'd move on to Tracy, then Hermione, and he told them all about what had happened the previous night. He told Daphne how he knew she'd be upset with him for losing his temper again, but hoped she'd understand why he did it and that it needed doing. To Hermione, he said he knew how she'd berate him, even using his full given name, and how much it made him wince as he knew what it foretold, and that he knew he was going to be in a world of verbal hurt before she stopped yelling at him. After lunch, he went across to visit young Colin, who had been there the longest, and told him all sorts of things about what he had been up to. That the school no longer seemed to think he was the heir of Slytherin after 8 very long months, and that he was trying to figure out what it was that had petrified him and the others, since no one else seemed to be doing anything of the sort. He also told the boy how he was now sleeping near 3 very beautiful witches, and that he'd better watch himself near them or Harry, would have to come and deal with him. To Justin, he spoke about how he didn't even know he was a Parselmouth until that night of a disaster known as the one and only dueling club meeting. He also told the boy he was pretty sure the beast was a snake of some kind, because it was the emblem of Slytherin House. While people heard hissing coming from the walls, he'd heard speech of a sort, and that it was believed Slytherin's familiar was a king of snakes. While speaking to young Colin, he could see the boy's hands looked as if they were gripping something in front of his face, and that the boy had one eye closed and appeared to be peering through something. He remembered back to Colin having a camera, carrying it with him everywhere he went, and how he would hold it. That was the same grip he saw of the boy's hands as he lay petrified in the bed. When Madame Pomfrey came in on one of her rounds, he asked, "Madame Pomfrey, did Colin have his camera in his hands when he was found?" "Yes, actually, he did," she replied. Albert, the headmaster, managed to pry it out of his fingers, but when he opened it, it belched out acrid black smoke. The insides had been fried. "Fred?" he asked. "Well, melted, as if by a fire," she replied. "And now you time to leave again. There's plenty of sunshine out there for you to bask under." Harry was spending what time he could with the girls, telling them about how life was progressing without them in it. It was a poorly kept secret, where Harry and the other 3 were spending a great deal of their time. But it was the return of Hagrid on the Monday that had the student body looking at him with a bit of awe, again. As he, Neville, Susan, and Hannah were sitting down for dinner on Monday night, Hagrid came in through the main doors. That had the student body whispering to each other with excitement. Except for some of the Slytherins, of course. Instead of heading directly to the head table, Hagrid sought out with his eyes Harry, and as soon as he spotted him sitting at the Hufflepuff table, headed straight to him. Hagrid then reached out, lifted Harry out of his seat, and hugged him, firmly. Quietly for Hagrid, that is, the big man said, "Thank you, Harry," and set him down on his feet. Harry shook his head and said, "Not me, Hagrid. Professors McGonagall and Flitwick are who you need to thank. I just gave them a little verbal nudge to do the right thing." "A verbal nudge is the way you call it," said Hagrid with a grin and twinkle in his eyes. "Well, I now have me own lawyer and everything. He's promised me he's getting the old Mara bar last time, re-investigated and all. I'm happy for you, Hagrid, said a smiling Harry. Good luck. Hagrid patted him on the shoulder, nearly knocking him to his knees, and made his way to the head table. Professor McGonagall received the greatest shock when Hagrid reached out from behind her and hugged her and her chair together. Professor Flitwick was lifted completely out of his chair and hugged just as Harry was. But the Charms Master didn't seem to mind. Indeed, he looked happy for his rather large friend. Harry's package from Flourish and Blots arrived on the Thursday morning. Recognizing what it would be, he didn't open it. Instead, he left it shrunk and dropped it into his pocket for later. When the others asked him what it was and why he wasn't opening it, he just said, "It forms part of the next and final step in the public destruction of the fraud known as Gilderoy Lockhart, and I don't want people in here to see it, lest fingers be pointed my way." That afternoon, Harry grabbed his written notice concerning Lockhart and joined the others in the come-and-go room. Though he couldn't make much sense of the instructions on how to use the dictaquill, Susan stepped in to help him out. "My aunt uses these all the time to take accurate statements from people," she explained. "I'm now used to them." Taking what Harry had already written, she then dictated it to the quill. Everyone else remained silent as she read. When she was finished, she deactivated the quill and set it aside, and everyone gathered around to see the results. "Well," said Neville, "that's pretty neat." "I'm impressed," said Harry. "The calligraphy is astounding, and more importantly, no one is going to have a clue who wrote it." "However," said Susan, "anyone with experience of a dictaquill is going to recognize the handwriting, if you will. If someone really wants to investigate who drafted this, they'd first go searching for the quill. They'd need evidence before they could search a student's trunk on the off chance it was a student who did it," said Harry. "I think I made enough changes to my usual style of writing to throw them off the scent to come looking at me. Besides, my trunk is locked to my and Daphne's magical signatures. They'd have to destroy it to get in. I cannot see them doing that." "Now that it's done, what do you want to do with it?" asked Neville. "Make copies," replied Harry. "Make hundreds of copies. I plan to sneak into the Great Hall very early in the morning and leave a copy of this at every place setting, including the staff. Any I have left over will be stuck with sticking charms to oft-used doors later. And then wait for all the fun as the students come in," mused Hannah. Taking out a whole stack of unused parchment, Hannah and Susan then started to rip sheets into smaller pieces to be transfigured. As their two strongest in transfiguration and the copy charm, Harry and Neville started making the copies. Once they each had 10, they then started to copy 10 at a time. After about the first half-dozen times of doing this, Harry switched to hitting each small stack with a permanency charm so that they'd last for at least a couple of days. After the first couple hundred, they had to stop. Though they were getting much better at drawing in and channeling magic, it still took a lot out of them. Besides, they needed to go to dinner. However, straight after dinner, they were back in the room to finish everything up. Harry packed away his new dictaquill, bundled the parchment and shrunk it. It all went into his book bag. A quick tempest charm, and they saw they had a little while left before curfew, so decided to visit their friends in the infirmary. The next morning, after his very early wake-up alarm, Harry donned his invisibility cloak, cast a silencing charm on himself, and hurried down to the Great Hall. 3/4 of an hour later, he was back in his dorm and in bed. He waited until his dorm mates were up and moving before he rose again. Pretending he'd only just woken up, he went through his ablutions and took his time getting ready. Then walked with a couple of other Ravenclaws down to the Great Hall. He was a little early, but that was planned. He didn't want he or his friends to be the first ones down, but he also wanted to ensure he got there early enough to catch if someone tried to collect all the notices. He'd used a low-powered sticking charm to ensure one of the younger students didn't collect them all up, but it wouldn't have been beyond the teaching staff's ability. Walking in, he saw the other 3 had already beaten him down and were sitting at the Gryffindor table. They were grinning like loons. However, it didn't stand out because that seemed to be the expressions on other faces. Some were scowling while they were reading. Some had already finished reading and kept looking up at the head table. Lockhart's seat was vacant, as he always liked to have an audience already in the hall when he made a grand entrance. Most of the staff were already sitting down, and none of them seemed inclined to gather up all the notices. However, both Professor McGonagall and Professor Flitwick noticed him entering. Both were slightly smiling back at him. Harry affected a mien of divine innocence and curiosity that seemed to fool them not in the least. Sitting with his friends, Hannah made a show of showing him the notice, so he tried to pick it up. When he couldn't, he used his wand to cancel the charm on it, picked it up, and proceeded to look as if he was avidly reading it. In all the right places, he schooled his expression to show the proper emotions and animatedly talked to his friends about it. Looking around, he could see some of the students in small groups had their supposed data texts on the table before them and were comparing the information within with what was included in the notice. And they weren't happy. They even started drawing small crowds of people around them who were reading over their shoulders. When the woodpecker finally made his entrance, the entire hall went quiet. Everyone was glaring at him with some level of hostility. A little worried about the reaction his entrance generated, he quickly took seat with an obvious artificial bonhomie and tried to engage the staff around him, including Professor Snape, in conversation. Snape merely indicated the notice and offered him one he'd already removed the sticking charm from, then sat looking at him with, scarily enough, a smile. Harry and the others did not have to mask carefully watching the man, as the entire hall sat there in silence watching him, and some looked ready to kill him on the spot. Professors McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, Sinistra, Babbage, and Vector all had their wands out and in plain sight, and were carefully watching the student body. The warning was obvious. As soon as the fop started reading, he went white, then passed from white to green. After reading what looked like only the first couple of paragraphs, he suddenly stood up and bolted from the room out the nearest staff entrance, knocking his chair over in the process, his indigo and gold robes flapping behind him. One wag, Harry didn't know who, called, "Goodbye, fraud," just before the man reached the door. Once he was gone, excited noise returned to the hall. Professor McGonagall stood and waited for the hall to quieten down again. "It appears," she intoned, "our Professor Lockhart has taken ill." That earned her quite a few snickers. "As such," she continued, "I believe defense against the dark arts classes for at least the rest of the day will be cancelled." And that earned her a few cheers. Turning to look at Harry, she said, "Mr. Potter, do you know anything about this?" The other three grinned at him as the entire hall watched, wondering what he'd do. Harry slowly stood and stepped back over his bench seat before facing the head table. "Professor, I should be shocked and disappointed, but you're not," said one wag, clearly enough from down the Gryffindor table, which earned him a few snickers and made even Professor McGonagall's lips twitch a bit. "That you would imply such vile and baseless claims against me," he calmly continued, choosing to ignore the remark. "I would have you know, I suspect I have the alibi of my own dorm mates, who may attest I was abed until after 7:00 a.m., when I rose to attend my ablutions before hurrying down here at such time, arriving after you yourself." "Uh-huh," said the professor, clearly not believing him. "If it is discovered by chance you are responsible for this, I shall be forced to dock Ravenclaw House. 1 point, that is all," and sat down again. Harry gave a slight bow before returning to his own seat. The message was loud and clear to everyone. Firstly, that she knew it was Harry who did it. Secondly, that they weren't going to be investigating. And thirdly, that she was not upset with him for doing it. A few moments later, Professor Flitwick motioned for the acting headmistress to draw closer. She leaned over to hear what he had to say. "You noticed he did not deny it," he muttered. "Of course I did," she muttered back. The words he used were quite specific. Should, would have, may. The Weasley twins, of course, immediately questioned Harry about how he did it. In response, and as a firm believer that sometimes a good defense is a weak offense, he accused them of doing it and implicating him as their scapegoat. Outside of meals, on a couple of occasions, Harry went to the scene of the crimes of the other victims, usually taking Neville with him. And since Floppart and most of his personal effects had disappeared since the previous Friday, with clear signs of a hasty departure, they also had the extra time of the 2 sessions of Dada Free. He found out from the Gryffindors where Colin was found and stood in the same spot as if he had a camera in his hands. From there, he then headed down to where he first saw Finch Fletchley and had Neville stand where he knew Sir Nicholas to roughly be. If he hadn't fallen over, and considering exactly how Justin was lying when Harry found him, Harry was able to get a pretty accurate idea of where he was standing and in which direction he was facing. "All right," he said to Neville. Sir Nicholas would normally float with his feet about 2 feet off the floor. Harry darted into the nearest classroom and came out with a normal class stool. He placed it where he believed Sir Nicholas would have been floating and told Neville to kneel on it if he could. Gingerly, Neville complied, but he still appeared to be uncomfortable.
"All right,"
said Harry, and Finch Fletchley would have stood right here with his head just so, looking, and found himself staring at Neville's chest. "Damn," he exclaimed. "What?" asked Neville, a little wobbly on the stool. "Hop down, Neville, and come standing where I am." Neville moved to where Harry stood and facing the same way, and Harry went to the stool and kneeled on it. "All right, Nev," he said. "What are you looking straight at?" "Your chest," frowned the boy. "Okay, now what would you see if I was a silvery, somewhat translucent ghost of Sir Nicholas's stature?" Neville frowned and stepped a full pace to the left. "I'd be looking right through him and see straight down the corridor." "Precisely," said Harry, a little excited. He hopped off the stool and pushed it a little out of the way before moving back to stand where the stool was placed. Sir Nicholas was standing here, and Finch Fletchley was standing. Neville took the pace back and said, "Here." "Yes," said Harry. "The two meet coming from opposite directions. Sir Nicholas is a friendly sort, so he stops to have a chat, even if the student is from another house, and Finch Fletchley is a puff so," and he shrugged. "So they're having a chat. Finch Fletchley sees movement through Sir Nicholas down the corridor. He gets petrified and topples over. Sir Nicholas, who looks you in the eye when he talks to you, sees the look of surprised shock pass over Finch Fletchley's face right before he's petrified and topples, knowing it has to be something behind him and maybe even thinking whatever it was wouldn't harm him because he's already dead and he could discover the identity of the culprit for the staff. Sir Nicholas spins around to take a look for himself, and whatever it is petrifies him too." "Wow," said Neville. "You think?" "Yeah, Nev," replied Harry. "I think." After Harry returned the stool to the classroom, he and Neville started to make their way back to the Great Hall. On the way, Harry continued with his thinking. The Sir Nicholas got the full brunt, rather than a reflection or refraction. It affected him more. He turned up black and smoky. According to Madame Pomfrey, black smoke is also what came out of young Mr. Creevy's camera when Dumbledore opened it. She said the insides of the camera had been burnt. So, Mrs. Norris saw, whatever it was, in the reflection of the water in the corridor. Colin saw it through the lens of his camera. Justin saw it through Sir Nicholas. And our girls saw it in the reflection of the mirror. "Now, Nev," said Harry, turned them both until they were facing each other. "Where were the girls before they ended up in that corridor with the compact mirror? What were they doing?" Neville frowned in thought and said, "They said they were going to the library. Hermione said she had an idea what it might be." "Not who?" asked Harry, interrupting. Frowned Neville before he looked back at Harry. "No. She definitely said it, because Hannah said, when they left, don't they mean who? And I remember that." "All right," said Harry, starting them walking again. "What happened then, do you know?" "Hermione said she had an idea what it might be, and she needed help looking through books of magical creatures," said Neville. "The fact she had that mirror in hand means she, or they, figured it out and were on their way back to you three," said Harry. "Damn, I wish she'd had her book bag with her. She's always writing things down." "Well, she's holding a piece of parchment in her hand now, Harry," said Neville. "What?" asked Harry, stopping them both again. "I thought she was holding a mirror." "Her other hand, Harry," he replied. "The one she's got clenched against her middle?" asked Harry. "Yeah," replied Neville. "You can just see the parchment sticking out the top of her fist, I guess." "We need that piece of parchment," declared Harry. "Straight after dinner, you and I are going to the infirmary to get it." The four immediately headed to the infirmary after dinner and entered quietly. Madame Pomfrey wasn't on the main floor, so they suspected she was in her office or private quarters. They quickly made their way to each side of Hermione's bed, and Neville pointed to Hermione's left fist. "There, do you see it?" he whispered. "You're the strongest of us, Neville," whispered Harry. "You pull her fingers open and I'll ease it out, all right?" Neville nodded and reached out with both hands to grip Hermione by the wrist and jam his own fingers under her fingertips. It was no easy task. Hermione's hand was clamped so tightly around the paper that Neville had to strain hard to get her fingers even a little open. Harry was gently pulling on the tip of the parchment where it peeked out and was sure he was going to tear it, while Neville continued to struggle and the girls kept watch. Harry tugged and twisted. At last, after several tense minutes, the parchment came free. It was a page torn from a very old library book. Harry smoothed it out eagerly, and Neville and the girls leaned close to read it too. "Of the many fearsome beasts and monsters that roam our land, there is none more curious or more deadly than the basilisk, known also as the king of serpents. This snake, which may reach gigantic size and live many hundreds of years, is born from a chicken's egg, hatched beneath a toad. Its methods of killing are most wondrous, for aside from its deadly and venomous fangs, the basilisk has a murderous stare, and all who are fixed with the beam of its eye shall suffer instant death. Spiders flee before the basilisk, for it is their mortal enemy, and the basilisk flees only from the crowing of the rooster, which is fatal to it." And beneath this, a single word had been written, in a hand they all recognized as Hermione's. "Pipes." It was as though somebody had just flicked a light on in Harry's brain. "Neville," he breathed. "This is it. This is the answer. The monster in the chamber is a basilisk, a giant serpent. That's why I've been hearing that voice all over the place, and nobody else has heard it. It's because I understand parcel tongue. The crowing of the rooster is fatal to it." Hannah read aloud. "Hagrid's roosters were killed. I remember the older students talking about it in our common room. The heir of Slytherin didn't want one anywhere near the castle once the chamber was opened." "But how has the basilisk been getting around the place?" asked Neville. "A giant snake. Someone would have seen." Susan, however, pointed at the word Hermione had scribbled at the foot of the page. "Pipes," she said. "Pipes, Neville. It's been using the plumbing, and Harry's been hearing that voice inside the walls. But this still doesn't tell us where the entrance could be found," said Harry. "And I, for one, want a piece of this thing. I, for one, am amazed Hermione actually ripped a page out of a book," said Hannah. "Focus, Hannah," said Susan, before looking at Harry. "Harry, it's a bloody basilisk. We need to tell the staff." "That'll go down well, don't you think?" said Neville. "Excuse me, Professor. We know you're like 70 years old, and all but us 4 12-year-olds have solved the crime you and the rest of the staff have been scratching your heads about all year. It's a basilisk. And no, we don't know where it is," continued Harry, "nor how to get into the chamber if that's where it's been hiding, why it's now woken up, how it managed to write words on the wall if there is someone who's controlling it, who they are, or anything else really." "We won't be believed," said Susan sadly. "No," replied Harry with a sigh. "We're going to have to figure the rest of it by ourselves. Now that they knew the truth about what and mostly how it was happening, they still needed to know who was behind it and find the chamber or wherever the basilisk was being kept. When they mapped out where all the attacks were taking place, it was easy to see they were all centered on the 2nd floor and near the passage where Mrs. Norris was attacked. So that was where they focused their search. Each of them, from that moment on, carried a small handheld mirror and used it religiously to look around corners before moving from one corridor to the next. They searched behind tapestries and suits of armor, they jiggled and wrenched upon wall sconces and torch brackets, they checked behind the various paintings, and they researched for and used various detection spells. After almost 2 weeks, they were getting to the stage of searching individual bricks, looking for whatever they could find. When others happened upon them in their search, they would stop and help for a while. However, with exams rapidly approaching, most students wanted to get stuck into revision work. Harry had also ducked over to Hogsmeade the previous Wednesday, now that the day was completely free for him, and purchased 2 new roosters. Because he didn't feel confident in doing it, he found a witch who was willing to transfigure them into simple blocks of wood. She also did it in such a way that a simple cancellation charm, finite incantum, would revert them back to roosters. When she asked what he wanted them for, apparently worried he might be into dark magic rituals, he told her that someone or something had killed all of Hagrid's roosters. She thought him a good boy for buying Hagrid 2 new ones. He simply did not tell her that was not why he bought them. From then on, Harry had taken to carrying 1 block around in his book bag, and having Neville carry the other. During the final week before the mandrakes were ready for harvesting the next Saturday, with the mandrake draft being ready the next day, Harry was finding himself getting quite anxious for his betrothed to be woken. At lunch on the Saturday, Susan and Hannah came running into the Great Hall to find Harry and Neville sitting opposite each other at the Ravenclaw table, discussing quietly between themselves what they would tell their 3 girls when they woke the next day. Both girls quickly sat next to the boys, Susan next to Harry and Hannah next to Neville. Susan excitedly said, "Harry, you need to come and talk to Myrtle." "Why?" he asked. "Because of all the places we searched around there, we never searched the girls' bathroom," she said. "Well, Neville and I wouldn't go in there even if it's out of order. It's a girls' bathroom," said Harry. "Wait, you think the entrance is in there?" "Yes," she said. "It occurred to me that Mrs. Norris wasn't the first to be attacked, and she was attacked outside the girls' bathroom. It was Myrtle, even if it was 50 years ago. So I went in there to talk to her. It took a while, but she told me the last thing she saw before she died was 2 big yellow eyes surrounded by green skin." Harry and Neville looked at each other, gathered up their things, and trotted out with the girls following. They headed straight for the bathroom before Neville said, "Wait, I need to go and get my block. Just in case, mind." So they detoured towards the Gryffindor tower. As they were returning, a very worried Ron Weasley came running the other way. When he saw them, he asked, "Neville, you haven't seen Ginny, have you?" "No." "Why?" asked Neville back. "She's disappeared," Weasley cried. "She tried to tell me and Seamus something she claimed was important earlier, and Pretty Perfect Percy chased her off. I haven't seen her since." "And she's not down in the Great Hall?" asked Harry. "No, no one's seen her. Her dorm mates say she's been acting weird for ages, and I've not noticed." He suddenly shifted from very worried to frightened out of his wits. What if the monster's got her?" "Calm down, Ron," scolded Neville. "You won't be any help to her, or even have half a chance of finding her if you flat out panic. If we see her, we'll send her to the Gryffindor common room, all right?" said Hannah. The red-headed boy nodded and said, "Yeah, thanks," and trotted off, continuing on his way. Still using their mirrors, they made their way down to the 2nd-floor corridor. Between one corner and the next, Harry stopped and, with a look of understanding on his face, said, "It's young Weasley." "What?" asked Neville. "Young Weasley, Ginny Weasley, she's doing it," he said. "Why her?" asked Hannah. "Because, over the course of the year, she's been looking more and more haggard," he replied. "Like she's carrying a great deal of stress. Like maybe she's possessed or something." "Well, that's hardly grounds," started Susan. "No," interrupted Harry. "I also remember her walking towards the 2nd-floor bathroom as if she was in a complete daze. Like she was a zombie or something. I just know I'm right. I can't explain it any other way." "Let's go talk to Myrtle and see what we can do from there," said Neville. The 4 continued to move down to the 2nd-floor corridor. With a final mirrored look around the corner, the 4 entered the corridor with the entrance to the girls' bathroom. They walked towards the door, and Hannah gave a little scream as they passed the message that was still scrawled on the wall. Turning to look, Harry and the others saw there was now a new message underneath the first. The heir of Slytherin had left another message. "Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever." Susan suddenly grabbed Harry's arm. "Harry, her skeleton—" "I know," said Harry. "We need to talk to Myrtle." Rushing into the bathroom, they heard the ghost wailing in the end cubicle. With the girls leading, they approached. "Myrtle," called Hannah. "Myrtle, we need to talk to you." There was a few moments before there was a big splash. Suddenly a ghost of a girl in old-fashioned Hogwarts robes came through the stall door. She looked at Hannah and asked, "Yes?" before she turned and saw Susan, Harry and Neville. "What are boys doing in here?" "They're here at our invitation, Myrtle," said Susan. "We need to ask you a couple of questions." "Well, you better make it quick," said the ghost with a bit of a huff. "I don't know when she'll be back." She'd sneered on the word she. "She?" asked Harry. With another huff, Myrtle replied, "The little red-haired girl in Gryffindor robes." "She teases you or something?" asked Harry. "No, she comes in and hisses at the sinks over there," she replied, pointing to a circular set of ceramic sinks in the middle of the floor away from the stalls. "A red-haired Gryffindor? The only one I know of is Ginny Weasley," said Neville. It seems Ron was right to panic. Harry turned to look and walked over to them, walking around them. "She hisses at them, you say?" "Yes, hisses," replied the ghost, affronted as if Harry dared to question if she was telling the truth or not. "It scares me," she continued in a little voice, "so I run back to my stall and hide." "This means," said Harry, "I can't be the only Parselmouth in the school. The heir of Slytherin's won too. That's how she's been controlling the basilisk." "What are we going to do?" said Hannah. "Should we go straight to McGonagall? Was she here a little while ago?" Susan asked the ghost. "Yes," replied the ghost. "It must have been about 15 minutes ago or something." "Give me a second," said Harry, before he ran out of the room. He rushed over to the message and stuck the point of his left index finger into the scrawl of the second message. When he pulled his finger away, the tip was coated in a red, slightly sticky substance. When he smelled it, it gave off a faint coppery smell. Blood. He ran back into the bathroom and said, "The message is written in blood. I doubt we have much time. Have a look around this sink thing and see if you can see anything out of the ordinary." The other three joined Harry at the sinks and were looking all over it. There seemed nothing out of the ordinary until Neville spotted something scratched on the side of one of the copper taps. It was a tiny snake. "Here," he called. "There's an engraving of a snake." The other three gathered around and saw it. "That tap's never worked," said Myrtle brightly as Neville tried to turn it. "She hisses at it," mumbled Harry. "Chamber of Secrets." "Whoa, Harry," said Neville, stumbling back. "Give someone a warning before you do that." "What does it sound like to you?" asked Harry. "Hissing, like a big snake," he replied. "I thought it must have been in here with us now." "Sorry," said Harry. "I didn't know. To me it sounds like normal talking, but with added sibilance on the S's." With a sigh, Harry stood up and the others followed. Moving back, he said, "All right, everyone, back away. I'm going to try a few words to see if I can open it." With the others standing away behind him, Harry focused on the snake engraving. He was running through his mind what words to try when they were interrupted. Echoing through the corridors came Professor McGonagall's voice, magically magnified. "All students to return to their house dormitories at once. All teachers return to the staff room immediately, please." Harry wheeled around to stare at the others. "Not another attack? Not now?" asked Susan. "No, I think Mr. Weasley has finally alerted the staff his sister is missing," replied Harry, "or someone else has seen the message outside." "What'll we do?" asked Hannah. "Go back to our dormitories?" Frowning, he replied, "No. I'm going to continue to try and get this hidden entrance, if that's what it is, open." Looking at the others, he said, "Hannah, Susan, please go to the staff room and let Acting Headmistress McGonagall know where we are and why. Neville, I'm going to get this entrance open. When I do, are you still willing to follow me down?" Bracing himself up, the other boy replied, "I meant what I said, Harry. Where a Potter goes, a Longbottom will be with him." "Be safe," said Hannah, before the two girls ran out of the bathroom. "Good man," said Harry to Neville. He then reached into his book bag and pulled out his mirrored sunglasses. Using a spare scrap of parchment, he copied the scrap into a matching pair of glasses and offered them to Neville. "I don't know how well they're going to work, but I think they may stop the basilisk from killing you," said Harry. "However, you will probably still end up petrified." Neville nodded and accepted the glasses. Harry turned back to the sinks and started calling words: entrance, entry, move, secret, secrets, sesame, open. Except words weren't what he heard. He was making a strange hissing sound. On the hiss for open, the tap glowed with a brilliant white light and began to spin. Next second, the sink began to move. The sink, in fact, sank right out of sight, leaving a large pipe exposed, a pipe wide enough for a man to slide into. Harry heard Neville gasp. He already knew what he was going to do. "I'm going down there," said Harry. He couldn't not go, not now they had found the entrance to the chamber, not if there was even the faintest, slimmest, wildest chance that the Weasley girl might be alive. "We are going down there," said Neville. Harry dropped his wand into his hand and lowered himself slowly into the pipe. With a muttered "Lumos," he let go. It was like rushing down an endless, slimy, dark slide. He could see more pipes branching off in all directions, but none as large as theirs, which twisted and turned, sloping steeply downward, and he knew that he was falling deeper below the school than even the dungeons. Behind him he could hear Neville thudding slightly at the curves. Just as he had begun to worry about what would happen when he hit the ground, the pipe levelled out. He shot out of the end with a wet thud, landing on the damp floor of a dark stone tunnel, large enough to stand in. Harry stood aside as Neville came whizzing out of the pipe too. "We must be miles under the school," said Harry, his voice echoing in the black tunnel. "Under the lake, probably," said Neville, squinting around at the dark, slimy walls. Harry cast a quick cleaning charm on them both. "Thanks, Harry," muttered Neville, not really paying attention. "Come on," Harry said. With a call of "Lumos" from Neville, the two boys advanced down the stone tunnel, their footsteps slapping loudly on the wet floor. The tunnel was so dark that they could only see a little distance ahead. Their shadows on the wet walls looked monstrous in the wand light. "Remember," Harry said quietly as they walked cautiously forward, "any sign of movement, close your eyes right away." But the tunnel was quiet as the grave, and the first unexpected sound they heard was a loud crunch as he stepped on what turned out to be a rat's skull. Harry lowered his wand to look at the floor and saw that it was littered with small animal bones. Trying very hard not to imagine what the Weasley girl might look like if they found her, Harry led the way forward around a dark bend in the tunnel. "Harry, there's something up there," said Neville hoarsely, grabbing Harry's shoulder. They froze. Watching, Harry could just see the outline of something huge and curved, lying right across the tunnel. It wasn't moving. "Maybe it's asleep," he breathed, glancing back. Harry edged forward, his wand held high. The light slid over a gigantic snakeskin of a vivid, poisonous green lying curled and empty across the tunnel floor. The creature that had shed it must have been 20 feet long at least. "Blimey," said Neville, weakly. "Yeah," said Harry, his heart beating in his chest. "That's big." After looking at it for a few moments more, Harry said, "Come on, we need to find the girl," and continued to lead the way. The tunnel turned and turned again. Every nerve in Harry's body was tingling. Unpleasantly, he wanted the tunnel to end, yet dreaded what he'd find when it did. And then, at last, as he crept around yet another bend, he saw a solid wall ahead on which two entwined serpents were carved, their eyes set with great glinting emeralds. Harry approached with Neville right behind, his throat very dry. There was no need to pretend these stone snakes were real. Their eyes looked strangely alive. He could guess what he had to do. He cleared his throat, and the emerald eyes seemed to flicker. "Serpent," said Harry, in a low, faint hiss. The serpents parted as the wall cracked open. The halves slid smoothly out of sight. The boys, both shaking from head to foot, walked inside. They were standing at the end of a very long, dimly lit chamber. Towering stone pillars, entwined with more carved serpents rising to support a ceiling lost in darkness, casting long black shadows through the odd greenish gloom that filled the place. His heart beating very fast, Harry stood listening to the chill silence. Could the basilisk be lurking in a shadowy corner behind a pillar, and where was the girl? Cancelling the light charm, Harry quietly said, "I think there might soon be a need for the glasses and roosters. Nev, hold the block ready in your left hand, just in case." Following his own advice, he donned his glasses and reached into his own bag to draw out the block of wood, shifting it to his left hand. Then he moved forward between the serpentine columns. Every careful footstep echoed loudly off the shadowy walls. He kept his eyes narrowed, ready to clamp them shut at the smallest sign of movement. The hollow eye sockets of the stone snakes seemed to be following him. More than once, with a jolt of the stomach, he thought he saw one stir. Then, as he drew level with the last pair of pillars, a statue as high as the chamber itself loomed into view, standing against the back wall. Harry had to crane his neck to look up into the giant face above. It was ancient and monkeyish, with a long, thin beard that fell almost to the bottom of the wizard's sweeping stone robes, where two enormous grey feet stood on the smooth chamber floor, and between the feet, face down, lay a small, black-robed figure with flaming red hair. Harry indicated the girl to Neville. Staying alert, the two hurried to the girl. Neville resheathed his wand, knelt and shook the girl's shoulders, then turned her over. Her face was white as marble and as cold, yet her eyes were closed, so she wasn't petrified. "Ginny, please wake up," Neville muttered desperately, shaking her. Ginny's head lolled hopelessly from side to side. "She won't wake," said a soft voice. Harry spun around with his wand at the ready as Neville did the same from his kneeling position, his wand shooting from his holster. A tall, black-haired boy was leaning against the nearest pillar, watching. He was strangely blurred around the edges, as though Harry were looking at him through a misted window. "I don't recognize you," said Harry, "but I suspect Slytherin robes, mid-century styling, prefect badge, Tom Marvolo Riddle, right?" "Ah, I see you've heard of me," said the boy. "What do you mean, she won't wake?" asked Harry, changing the subject. "She's not dead, is she?" "She's still alive," said Riddle, "but only just." Harry stared at him. Tom Riddle had been at Hogwarts 50 years ago, yet here he stood in his Slytherin uniform, a weird misty light shining about him, not a day older than 16. And he had the Weasley girl's wand in his hand. "Are you a ghost?" Harry said uncertainly. "A memory," said Riddle quietly, "preserved in a diary for 50 years. He pointed toward the floor near the statue's giant toes. Lying open there was the little black diary. For a second, Harry wondered how it had got there, but there were more pressing matters to deal with. "Bullshit," said Harry. "Memories are not interactive." Riddle smiled back. "Quite. No, it is far more than the memories you probably know as misty silver strands. This is far more." "Well, do get on with it," drawled Harry. "I'd like to get back in time for dinner." "I've waited a long time for this, Harry Potter," said Riddle, "for the chance to see you, to speak to you." "Look," said Harry, losing patience, "how did Miss Weasley get like this?" "How did Ginny get like this?" he asked slowly. "Well, that's an interesting question," said Riddle pleasantly, "and quite a long story." "Just the executive summary will do then," Harry interrupted. Ignoring him, Riddle continued, "I suppose the real reason Ginny Weasley's like this is because she opened her heart and spilled all her secrets to an invisible stranger." "What are you talking about?" said Harry. "The diary," said Riddle. "My diary. Little Ginny's been writing in it for months and months, telling me all her pitiful worries and woes, how her brothers tease her, how she had to come to school with second-hand robes and books, how—" Riddle's eyes glinted, "how she didn't think famous, good, great Harry Potter would ever like her." All the time he spoke, Riddle's eyes never left Harry's face. There was an almost hungry look in them. "It's very boring having to listen to the silly little troubles of an 11-year-old girl," he went on. "But I was patient. I wrote back. I was sympathetic and kind. Ginny simply loved me. No one's ever understood me like you, Tom," he mimicked. "I'm so glad I've got this diary to confide in. It's like having a friend I can carry around in my pocket." Riddle laughed, a high, cold laugh that didn't suit him. It made the hairs stand up on the back of Harry's neck. "If I say it myself, Harry, I've always been able to charm the people I needed. So Ginny poured out her soul to me, and her soul happened to be exactly what I wanted. I grew stronger and stronger on a diet of her deepest fears, her darkest secrets. I grew powerful, far more powerful than little Miss Weasley. Powerful enough to start feeding Miss Weasley a few of my secrets, to start pouring a little of my soul back into her." "What do you mean?" asked Harry. "Haven't you guessed yet, Harry Potter?" said Riddle softly. Ginny Weasley opened the Chamber of Secrets. She strangled the school roosters and daubed threatening messages on the walls. She set the Serpent of Slytherin on 5 mudbloods and the Squib's cat. "Wrong," said Harry. "Only 2 Muggle-borns. The last 3 are all heirs of some very powerful houses. 2 of them are pure bloods." "I know," said Riddle, a little angrily. Of course, she didn't know what she was doing at first. It was very amusing. I wish you could have seen her new diary entries. Far more interesting they became. "Dear Tom," he recited in a little girl's voice, watching Harry's stoic face. "I think I'm losing my memory. There are rooster feathers all over my robes, and I don't know how they got there. Dear Tom, they can't remember what I did on the night of Halloween, but a cat was attacked and I've got paint all down my front. Dear Tom, Percy keeps telling me I'm pale and I'm not myself. I think he suspects me. There was another attack today, and I don't know where I was. Tom, what am I going to do? I think I'm going mad. I think I'm the one attacking everyone, Tom." Harry's fists were clenched, the nails digging deep into his palms. He heard Neville growl a little. At least Riddle seemed to be ignoring him. "And Ginny told me all about you, Harry," said Riddle. "Your whole fascinating history." His eyes roved over where the lightning scar once sat on Harry's forehead, and his expression grew hungrier. "I knew I must find out more about you, talk to you, meet you if I could. And now I have. When I had Hagrid expelled, Dumbledore kept an annoyingly close watch on me afterwards," said Riddle carelessly. "I knew it wouldn't be safe to open the chamber again while I was still at school, but I wasn't going to waste those long years I'd spent searching for it. I decided to leave behind a diary, preserving my 16-year-old self in its pages, so that, one day, with luck, I would be able to lead another in my footsteps and finish Salazar Slytherin's noble work." "Well, you haven't finished it," said Harry. "No one's died this time, not even the cat. In only a few more hours, the mandrake draught will be ready to be brewed and everyone who was petrified will be all right again." "Haven't you already guessed?" asked Riddle quietly. "Killing mudbloods doesn't matter to me anymore. For many months now, my new target has been you." Harry stared at him. "I knew what I must do. It was clear to me you were on the trail of Slytherin's heir. From everything Ginny had told me about you, I knew you would go to any lengths to solve the mystery, particularly if one of your best friends was attacked. And Ginny had told me the whole school was buzzing because you could speak Parseltongue. So I made Ginny write her own farewell on the wall and come down here to wait. She struggled and cried and became very boring, but there isn't much life left in her now. She put too much into the diary, into me, enough to let me leave its pages. At last, I have been waiting for you to appear since we arrived here. I knew you'd come. I have many questions for you, Harry Potter." "I don't care," Harry spat. "Well," said Riddle, smiling pleasantly, "how is it that you, a skinny boy with no extraordinary magical talent, managed to defeat the greatest wizard of all time? How did you escape with nothing but a scar while Lord Voldemort's powers were destroyed?" There was an odd red gleam in his hungry eyes now. "You want questions answered, but I want one answered first," said Harry slowly. "What is the diary, really?" Riddle just smiled and said, "I suppose I can tell you. After all, you and your friend, like little Ginny, will not be leaving this chamber ever again. It's called a Horcrux, Harry." "Thank you," Harry said. "To answer your first question, no one really knows. It is suspected my mother performed an illegal blood ritual which was powered up by the sacrifice of her life. Then, when you tried to kill me, your curse backfired on you, killing you." Before Riddle could say anything else, Harry said, "My turn. How many of these Horcruxes did you plan on making?" 7, said Riddle proudly. "The most powerful number in magic for the most powerful wizard in the world. Sorry to disappoint you and all that, but the greatest wizard in the world is Albus Dumbledore," drawled Harry. "Everyone says so. Even when you were at the height of your powers, you didn't dare try to attack him directly. On the few occasions he was able to find you, you fled in terror." The smile had gone from Riddle's face to be replaced by a very ugly look. "Dumbledore's been driven out of this castle by the mere memory of me," he hissed. "He's not as gone as you might think," Harry retorted. He was speaking at random, wanting to scare Riddle, wishing rather than believing it to be true. Riddle opened his mouth, but froze. Music was coming from somewhere. Riddle whirled around to stare down the empty chamber. The music was growing louder. It was eerie, spine-tingling, unearthly. It lifted the hair on Harry's scalp and made his heart feel as though it was swelling to twice its normal size. Then, as the music reached such a pitch that Harry felt it vibrating inside his own ribs, flames erupted at the top of the nearest pillar. Fawkes appeared, piping his weird music to the vaulted ceiling. Within his talons, he was gripping a ragged bundle. A second later, the bird was flying straight at Harry. It dropped the ragged thing it was carrying at his feet, then landed heavily on his shoulder. The bird stopped singing. It sat still and warm next to Harry's cheek, gazing steadily at Riddle. "That's a phoenix," said Riddle, staring shrewdly back at it. "Fawkes," breathed Harry, and he felt the bird's golden claws squeeze his shoulder gently. "And that," said Riddle, now eyeing the ragged thing that Fawkes had dropped, "is the old-school sorting hat." So it was, patched, frayed, and dirty. The hat lay motionless at Harry's feet. Riddle began to laugh again. He laughed so hard that the dark chamber rang with it, as though 10 riddles were laughing at once. This is what Dumbledore sends his defender, a songbird and an old hat. Do you feel brave, Harry Potter? Do you feel safe now? Harry didn't answer. He didn't see what use Fawkes or the sorting hat were, but his courage was mounting. "To business, Harry," said Riddle, still smiling broadly. "Twice, in your past, in my future, we have met. And twice I failed to kill you. How did you survive? Tell me everything. The longer you talk," he added softly, "the longer you stay alive." "Nope," replied Harry. "I know everything I need to know now. You've no longer anything to bargain with." Riddle's face contorted. Then he forced it into an awful smile. "So, your mother died to save you. Yes, that's a powerful countercharm. I can see now. There is nothing special about you after all. I wondered, you see, there are strange likenesses between us, after all. Even you must have noticed, both half-bloods, orphans, raised by muggles. Probably the only 2 Parson-Muths to come to Hogwarts since the great Slytherin himself. We even look something alike. But after all, it was merely a lucky chance that saved you from me. That's all I wanted to know." Harry stood, tense, waiting for Riddle to raise his wand. But Riddle's twisted smile was widening again. "Now, Harry, I'm going to teach you a little lesson. Let's match the powers of Lord Voldemort, heir of Salazar Slytherin." "You're not," interrupted Harry. "What?" stuttered Riddle, thrown off balance. "I said, you're not," replied Harry. "Not what?" asked Riddle, annoyed. "You are neither a lord nor the heir of Slytherin," replied Harry. Angrily, Riddle snarled, "I did my research, Potter. I traced my bloodline all the way back." "I don't doubt it," shrugged Harry. "However, you got yourself dead. By law and by magic, the heirship passed on. You know this." With a smirk of his own, he asked, "Do you want to know to whom?" Riddle just stood there, almost trembling in rage. After a few moments, he snarled, "Yes." After a few moments' hesitation, enjoying Riddle's ire, Harry smirked. "Me." Riddle glared back, his face a mask of fury. Without another word, he strode away to stop between the high pillars and looked up into the stone face of Salazar Slytherin, high above in the half-darkness. Riddle opened his mouth wide and hissed, "Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts force." Harry wheeled around to look up at the statue, Fawkes swaying on his shoulder. Slytherin's gigantic stone face was moving. Horror-struck, Harry saw his mouth opening, wider and wider to make a huge black hole, and something was stirring inside the statue's mouth. Something was slithering up from its depths. "Here it comes, Neville," he said to the other boy, where he kneeled next to the girl. "The basilisk." "Neville," called Harry, "leave her. For now, get away from the statue and over here behind the pillars." Harry backed away until he hit the dark chamber wall and saw Neville get up and come running over. Just before he reached and took cover behind another pillar himself, he felt Fawkes's wings sweep his cheek as he took flight. Harry wanted to shout, "Don't leave me!" But what chance did a phoenix have against the King of Serpents? Something huge hit the stone floor of the chamber. Harry felt it shudder. He knew what was happening. He could sense it. He could almost see the giant serpent uncoiling itself from Slytherin's mouth. Then he heard Riddle's hissing voice. "Kill him." "Neville," called Harry to his friend, "it's coming for me." "Got your block ready?" The basilisk was moving toward Harry. He could hear its heavy body slithering heavily across the dusty floor. Eyes still tightly shut, Harry began to run sideways, not looking at the serpent. Riddle was laughing. "Sorry, Harry," said Neville. "I left it next to Ginny." Harry tripped at the words. He fell hard onto the stone and tasted blood. The serpent was barely feet from him, and he could hear it coming. There was a loud, explosive spitting sound right above him, and then something heavy hit Harry so hard that he was smashed into the wall. He dropped his own block of wood. Waiting for fangs to sink through his body, he heard more mad hissing, something thrashing wildly off the pillars, and the song of the phoenix from Fawkes. He couldn't help it. He opened his eyes wide enough to squint at what was going on, and reached into his bag for his sunglasses. His fingers found them broken. The lenses broken into itty bits. The enormous serpent, bright, poisonous green, thick as an oak trunk, had raised itself high in the air, and its great, blunt head was weaving drunkenly between the pillars. As Harry trembled, ready to close his eyes if it turned, he saw what had distracted the snake. Fawkes was soaring around its head, and the basilisk was snapping furiously at him with fangs long and thin as sabres. Fawkes dived. His long golden beak sank out of sight, and a sudden shower of dark blood spattered the floor. The snake's tail thrashed, narrowly missing Harry, and before Harry could shut his eyes, it turned. Harry looked straight into its face and saw that its eyes, both its great bulbous yellow eyes, had been punctured by the phoenix. Blood was streaming to the floor, and the snake was spitting in agony. "Said no." Harry heard Riddle screaming. "Said leave the bird. Leave the bird. The boy is behind you. You can still smell him. Kill them." Harry dropped down and picked up his block. He ran back the other way, back behind his original, now smashed pillar. Bending down, he threw and slid the block across the stone floor until it hit Neville in the side of the foot. The blinded serpent swayed, confused, still deadly. Fawkes was circling its head, piping his eerie song, jabbing here and there at its scaly nose as the blood poured from its ruined eyes. "Nev," called Harry, "it can't kill you with its stare any more." Fawkes gouged out its eyes. "The block's at your foot." The serpent's tail whipped across the floor again. It struck what was left of the pillar behind which Harry was crouched. Something soft hit his face. The basilisk had swept the sorting hat into Harry's arms. Harry seized it. Not knowing why, he rammed it onto his head and threw himself flat onto the floor, as the basilisk's tail smashed the rest of the pillar away. The hat contracted, as though an invisible hand was squeezing it very tightly. Something very hard and heavy thudded onto the top of Harry's head. He grabbed the top of the hat to pull it off, and felt something long and hard beneath it. A gleaming silver sword had appeared inside the hat, its handle glittering with rubies the size of eggs. "Kill the boy. Leave the bird. The boy is behind you. Sniff. Smell him." Harry was on his feet, ready. The basilisk's head was falling, its body coiling around, hitting pillars as it twisted to face him. He could see the vast bloody eye sockets, see the mouth stretching wide, wide enough to swallow him whole, lined with fangs long as the sword in his hand, thin, glittering, venomous. It lunged blindly. Harry dodged, and it hit the chamber wall. It lunged again, but Harry was already running off behind yet another pillar. He needed to lead the beast away from Neville so the other boy could get his rooster to crow. When he heard Harry lead the serpent away, Neville bent down and picked up the block of wood. Popping his wand out of its holster, he muttered, "Finite incantum," over it. As it changed back into a rooster, he swept the little hood it was wearing before being transfigured off its head. He held his wand up and muttered, "Luma solim," and a bright light appeared above them. The clucking the rooster had been making when it was transfigured back had begun to draw the basilisk to his location. The basilisk lunged and struck the wall just to the side of the pillar, just missing him. Harry stepped out from behind his latest pillar and whistled. The beast spun about. Harry stood his ground and hissed, "I'm over here, stinky breath." The basilisk lunged straight at him. Harry dived out of its way as it struck the wall of the chamber behind where he was standing. Neville stepped out from behind his pillar to see Riddle was staring, watching Harry. "Come on, you bugger," muttered Neville. Suddenly, the rooster crowed, and it was a full-bodied crow. The basilisk screamed and began thrashing about. Riddle spun to stare at Neville and screamed, "No!" He raised the wand in his hand. Still with his own wand in hand, Neville prepared to cast a shield or dive out of the way. Neville gave the rooster a little jiggle, and it crowed again. The basilisk screamed again and continued to thrash. From the other side, Harry stepped out on the opposite side to where the serpent had already struck. He charged the now barely moving basilisk. He whacked it once on the snout with the edge of the sword, but made no damage. Changing his idea, he drew the sword back like a spear, intent on thrusting the point between the beast's eyes. Just as he was making his thrust, the rooster crowed for a third time. The basilisk suddenly tilted its head back and opened its mouth. With the sword thrusting forward with all of Harry's might, it drove through the open mouth, through the roof of its mouth, and struck through to the brain. Harry was pulled forward with the initial thrust, his arm now within the serpent's mouth, his hand gripping the hilt. The beast suddenly wrenched its head, and Harry was flung away to land near the opposite wall, near where Neville still stood. As warm blood drenched Harry's arms, he felt a searing pain just above his elbow. One long, poisonous fang was left embedded in his arm. He gripped the fang that was spreading poison through his body and wrenched it out of his arm, but he knew it was too late. White-hot pain was spreading slowly and steadily from the wound as he lay on the floor. Even as he held the fang in his hand and watched his own blood soaking his robes, his vision went foggy. The chamber was dissolving in a whirl of dull color. "Neville," he called. "It's dead." He heard Neville come hurrying over. He again held a wooden block. A patch of scarlet swam past, and Harry heard a soft clatter of claws beside him. "Fawkes," said Harry thickly. "You were fantastic, Fawkes." Looking at his friend, who was looking back in shock and sorrow, he said, "Did you see Neville?" "He was magnificent." "So were you, you bloody idiot," croaked Neville. He felt the bird lay its beautiful head on the spot where the serpent's fang had pierced him. He could hear echoing footsteps, and then a dark shadow moved in front of him. "You're dead, Harry Potter," said Riddle's voice above him. "Dead, even Dumbledore's bird knows it." "Do you see what he's doing, Potter? He's crying." Harry blinked. Fawkes's head slid in and out of focus. Thick, pearly tears were trickling down the glossy feathers. "I'm going to sit here and watch you die, Harry Potter. Take your time. I'm in no hurry." Harry felt drowsy. Everything around him seemed to be spinning. "So ends the famous Harry Potter," said Riddle's distant voice before he laughed his high, cruel laugh. "In the Chamber of Secrets, defeated at last by the Dark Lord he so unwisely challenged. You'll be back with your dear mudblood mother soon, Harry. She bought you 12 years of borrowed time, but Lord Voldemort got you in the end, as you knew he must." "If this is dying," thought Harry, "it's not so bad." Even the pain was leaving him. "Do us both a favor, won't you, Tom? Shut your yap." But was this dying? Instead of going black, the chamber seemed to be coming back into focus. Harry gave his head a little shake, and there was Fawkes, still resting his head on Harry's arm. A pearly patch of tears was shining all around the wound, except that there was no wound. "Get away, bird," said Riddle's voice suddenly. "Get away from him," I said. "Get away." Harry raised his head. Riddle was pointing the Weasley girl's wand at Fawkes. There was a bang like a gun, and Fawkes took flight again in a whirl of gold and scarlet. "Phoenix tears," said Riddle quietly, staring at Harry's arm. "Of course, healing powers, I forgot." He looked into Harry's face. "But it makes no difference. In fact, I prefer it this way. Just you and me, Harry Potter. I'm going to kill your friend Neville here first. You can watch him die." He raised the wand, but Neville was faster. With a flash of his right hand, Neville's hand, now holding his wand, shot up. Stupefy, he cried. Riddle, as well as being struck by the spell, was sent soaring across the chamber to slam into the wall on the opposite side. Neville had instinctively drawn in magic and pumped the lot down his arm and out his wand. In a rush of wings, Fawkes had soared back overhead, and something fell into Harry's lap. The diary. Harry sat up and looked at it. There on the cover in gold letters was the name T.M. Riddle. Wondering why the bird gave it to him, he looked at Fawkes, where he landed just apart from them. Fawkes looked at the diary, then at the fang in Harry's hand, then back at the diary. Riddle stirred over next to the wall. He rose to his feet and, staggering, slowly raised Weasley's wand. Neville hit him with another stunner, sending his flying back into the wall again. Without thinking much about it, Harry seized the basilisk fang off the floor next to him, dropped the diary in its place, and plunged the fang straight into the heart of the book. There was a long, dreadful, piercing scream. Ink spurted out of the diary in torrents, streaming over Harry's hands, flooding the floor. Riddle, over near the wall, was writhing and twisting, screaming and flailing. He appeared to burn from the inside out and disappeared in a flash of light. Silence. Silence, except for the heavy breathing of two young boys and the steady drip-drip of water from the ceiling. The basilisk venom had burned a sizzling hole right through the diary. Shaking all over, Harry started to try to rise. Neville quickly stood and softly said, "Here, Harry," offering his arm. Taking it, Neville pulled him up to his feet. Harry's head was spinning as though he'd just travelled miles by flue powder. Slowly, he gathered together his wand, which he immediately resheathed, the sorting hat and the diary with the fang still in it. Neville walked over to the now motionless and clearly very dead basilisk and, with a huge tug, retrieved the glittering sword from the basilisk's mouth. Then came a faint moan from the end of the chamber. Young Miss Weasley was stirring. As Neville hurried toward her, she sat up. Her confused eyes travelled from the huge form of the dead basilisk, over Neville with his dirty great sword, over Harry in his blood-soaked robes, then to the diary in his hand. She drew a great shuddering gasp and tears began to pour down her face. "Harry, oh! Harry, I tried to tell you, but I couldn't. It was me, Harry, but I swear I didn't mean to. Riddle made me. He took me over. And how did you kill that thing? But where's Riddle? The last thing I remember is him coming out of the diary." Neville knelt down next to the distressed girl, placed the sword down on the ground, and took her in his arms. "It's all right, Ginny," he soothed. Harry held up the diary, showing the girl the diary with the fang through it. "Riddle's finished. Him and the basilisk. Now, let's get out of here. I'm going to be expelled." The girl wailed as Neville helped her awkwardly to her feet. "I've looked forward to coming to Hogwarts ever since Bill came, and I know I'll have to leave, and what'll Mum and Dad say?" Fawkes was waiting for them, hovering in the chamber entrance. Neville bent down and picked up the sword by its hilt, and urged the girl forward. They stepped over the motionless coils of the dead basilisk, through the echoing gloom, and back into the tunnel. Harry heard the stone doors close behind them with a soft hiss. Led by Fawkes, whose wide scarlet wings emitted a soft golden glow in the darkness, they walked all the way back to the mouth of the pipe. "Have you thought about how we're going to get back up this?" asked Neville. "Nope," replied Harry. Fawkes was now fluttering in front of them. His beady eyes bright in the dark, he was waving his long golden tail feathers. Harry looked uncertainly at him. "He looks like he wants you to grab hold," said Neville, looking perplexed. "But you're much too heavy for a bird to pull up there." With dawning realization, Harry said, "Fawkes isn't an ordinary bird." He turned to the other two and said, "We've got to hold on to each other in a line. Miss Weasley, grab Neville's hand and hold tight." Harry took the sword off Neville and tucked it and the sorting hat into his belt. He continued to hold the diary with its venomous fang attachment in his hand. "Grab a fistful of my trailing robes," Neville instructed. Neville took hold of the back of Harry's robes, and Harry reached out and took hold of Fawkes's strangely hot tail feathers. An extraordinary lightness seemed to spread through his whole body, and the next second, in a rush of wings, they were flying upward through the pipe. The chill air was whipping through Harry's hair, and before he'd stopped enjoying the ride, it was over. The three of them hit the wet floor of Moaning Myrtle's bathroom. The sink that hid the pipe was sliding back into place. From lying flat on his back on the floor, Harry looked up to see Professor McGonagall staring back down at him from an upside-down perspective. "Thank Merlin," she said, clearly breathing an audible sigh of relief. From where she was floating off to the side, Myrtle goggled at them. "You're alive," she said blankly to Harry. "There's no need to sound so disappointed," he said grimly to the ghost, standing up and helping the others up. "Oh, well, I'd just been thinking if you had died, you'd have been welcome to share my toilet," said Myrtle, blushing silver. "Well, that's very nice of you, Myrtle, thank you," he replied. "While I'm sure you'd enjoy a chit-chat with Myrtle, I'm afraid there are some people waiting for us in my office." "Too bad," said Harry. "We're off to the infirmary. If anyone wants to talk to us, they can talk to us there, after we've endured the loving ministrations of Mistress Pomfrey." Turning to the other two, he said, "Right, infirmary, you two, and me. Come along." Professor McGonagall looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. Instead, she stepped aside to let them pass, and followed until they were walking in the doors of the infirmary. She did not say a single word the whole, though admittedly short, trip. As they were about to pass through the doors, she turned and walked away, muttering to herself. Harry flung the doors open and half-bellowed, "Madam Pomfrey!" "Mr. Potter!" the Media Witch bellowed back from her desk just inside the door. Harry yelped and leapt aside. Neville snickered while leading young Miss Weasley inside. Harry had demanded the girl be seen to first and was explaining about the possession. "She's going to need to see a pretty competent mind healer to help her through what she's been through," he said. Madame Pomfrey set her hands on her hips and glared at him. "Are you trying to do my job for me, Mr. Potter?" "No, ma'am," replied Harry, backpedaling a little. "I just don't want to see dear old Albus try to tell her parents she's fine and they've got nothing to worry about. She's not fine at all." Madame Pomfrey got more of the story out of the girl before the doors were again flung open. "Ginny." It was apparently Mrs. Weasley. Of course, the girl immediately burst into tears. "Damn it," barked Harry, "we're not ready to see anyone just yet." Behind her came Mr. Weasley, Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, the Greengrasses, Sirius Madame Longbottom, and, unsurprisingly, Albus Dumbledore. Neville found himself being swept into the woman's tight embrace. "You saved her! You saved her! How did you do it?" She then came bearing down on Harry, who held his hand out in a fending-off gesture, and barked, "No." Mrs. Weasley seemed to hesitate between shock and anger at being spoken to that way, but skidded to a stop. "The reason why we're not ready to see anyone just yet is, for a start, I'm somewhat covered in the deadliest poison known to wizarding kind. I'm bearing, under my robes, a very sharp and very lethal weapon, and I have in my hand," he said, waving around the diary, "a combination of both. Any of which can kill you dead where you stand in seconds. Now please, back off!" "I think we'd all like to know how you saved Miss Weasley," said Professor McGonagall weakly. "Later, Professor," said Harry. "Medical treatment first, explanations later. Miss Weasley, for starters, has been quite distressed and has gone through 9 months of mental hell. She needs to spend time talking it through with a competent mind healer before you all distress her any further. In the meantime, she needs to spend time with Madame Pomfrey, and none of you will interfere with that." "Who do you think you are, young man?" Mrs. Weasley barked back. "I'm of a good mind." "Shut it," barked Harry. "I happen to be one of 2 people who just saved your daughter's life. However, I will not consider it finished saving until she's been seen to by Madame Pomfrey and a mind healer." "Molly," growled Mr. Weasley. "Back down. He's right." "What do you mean, poison, Mr. Potter?" asked Madame Pomfrey. "Basilisk venom," said Harry. "And if you want to know how big," he lifted the diary in his left hand and pulled the fang out with his right, holding it aloft. "It was this big. This is the tip of one of its fangs. And that's part of what I meant by having sharp and deadly weapons on my person. The fang will still have venom within it. One even tiny scratch and you'll be dead before you can get help." That had some of the adults talking, and Mrs. Weasley turning white as a sheet. Harry placed the diary and Fang on a close-by patient's wheeled table. "And here's another," he said, reaching into his robes and carefully drawing the sword back out through his belt before holding it aloft. More talking. Mrs. Weasley had to put her hand on a bed rail to steady herself. "From where I shoved this up through the roof of the basilisk's mouth, I suspect it punctured a venom sac and became coated in basilisk venom in the process," he said. Mrs. Weasley promptly fainted. With a few tisking sounds, Madame Pomfrey levitated the woman and placed her on the bed alongside her daughter. Harry then removed the sorting hat from his belt and placed it brim down on the same table. "It's about time, Mr. Potter," said the hat. Harry ignored it. Now, once Madame Pomfrey's talked with Miss Weasley and has her settled in bed for the night, even I know she needs plenty of rest. "Madame Pomfrey, I need her to take a look at my arm," said Harry firmly. "Then Neville and I need to shower and change. Only then will I deign to answer any other questions. So if you quite enjoy standing around a hospital ward being quiet and watching patients being treated, then stay. Otherwise, leave us be until we and Madame Pomfrey consider ourselves ready to see you." All of the adults, except for Madame Pomfrey, of course, wisely chose to move away and go stand on the other side of the infirmary to stay out of their way. Dumbledore tried to step forward, but when he said, "Now, Harry, Harry swirled his magic and growled at the man. Dumbledore wisely beat a hasty retreat. Harry chatted to Neville a little, said, "Don't let Dumbledore try to use legilimency on you or try to convince you to remain quiet about this. He's just looking to cover his own incompetent arse." He turned to the meaty witch and said, "Neville and I are going to leave you and Miss Weasley to talk until you're ready to see me." Moving over to stand with the adults, Gran said to Neville, "I trust, Neville, that you do not have on your person any sharp and deadly objects." Luckily for Mrs. Weasley, "No, Gran," he replied, and for the first time Harry had seen her. The stately lady enveloped her grandson in a firm hug. "Any more on you, Harry?" asked Sirius. "Yeah, on the right-hand sleeve of my robes and my hands," said Harry. "I need to get the stuff cleaned off." Dumbledore quickly conjured up a small stand with a large basin of warm, soapy water in it. "Thank you, Headmaster," he said, quickly dipping his hands within and doing his best to scrub them clean. Ink was another matter, though. After he pulled his hands out and accepted the offered conjured towel he was handed, Isabel, Cygnus, Gran, and Sirius all stepped forward to give him a hug without going near his right sleeve. "All right," said Harry. "The full telling of this would take hours, because what you don't know about this started 3 full weeks ago, with the petrification of our loved ones." He indicated the 3 where they lay a short distance away. "So, we're going to give you the highlights." When the adults didn't say anything, he nodded and said, "All right. As I said, this all started 3 weeks ago when Daphne, Tracy, and Hermione were petrified. While he and I were in here, very soon after the girls were brought in, Neville and I made a pact." With Neville adding a few important points, Harry then explained a little about their research, their physical search for the entrance, the gist of the physical manifestation of Riddle, Ginny's thrall, and their battle with the basilisk. The adults were just starting on asking questions when Madame Pomfrey called Harry over. "Besides being cranky," she said as he walked over, indicating he should lie down on yet another hospital bed. "What seems to be the problem with you?" Harry reached down and pulled up the sleeve of his robe on the arm where he was bit, getting them far enough raised to show the healed mark. He said, "Basilisk bite." Madame Pomfrey gasped and backed off a bit. "Mr. Potter," she yelped, "I should have seen to you first." But brought the green grasses, Sirius and Dumbledore over. Harry glared at the old man and said, "This is a medical issue I wish to discuss with my magical guardians and godfather, Mr. Dumbledore. Please back away and allow us our privacy." Dumbledore looked somewhere between abashed and angry, but he did move away and returned to stand with Professors McGonagall and Flitwick, Gran, Neville, and Mr. Weasley. Harry again lifted his robe sleeve to show the basilisk fang bite. "This is where the big green beastie bit me," he said. "The fang with the diary over there went right in there." "Sweet Merlin," gasped Cygnus. "Why aren't you dead?" "Phoenix tears," replied Harry. "Apparently phoenix tears heal bites and poisonings by basilisks, but it was a close thing. After Madame Pomfrey checked the bite over, she told him the scar would always remain but would diminish with time. Once she was satisfied the basilisk venom was no longer a risk in his system, she'd give him a cream that would help to eradicate much of the scar. She also healed the wound inside his lip and cheek when he'd tripped over something in the chamber, plus a couple of others he didn't know he had. During this, Dumbledore had left. She released him to shower and change. But instead, Harry went back across to the sword, fang and diary. He conjured a bag for the fang and diary and used a piece of cloth to hold the hilt of the sword. With the sword in one hand and the bag in the other, he walked back to Ravenclaw Tower. Students again leapt out of his way in fright or fear as he came towards them. However, this time he was pretty sure it had more to do with his dirty and haggard appearance, and that he was carrying a bloody great sword, than with him being the supposed heir of Slytherin. Walking into his dorm, he dropped the sword bag and his book bag onto his bed, then stripped off and took all 3 items into the bathroom. There he thoroughly cleaned the sword and fang, and did his best to wipe all the dried venom off the cover of the diary, and gave himself a thorough scrub down. Returning to his bed, he opened his trunk and pulled out a decent set of lightweight clothes that was stylish and smart. Thinking for a moment, he called Petey. The little elf popped into the dorm room. "Yes, Harry?" Holding the sword and fang out, he said, "Can you please be very careful with the edge on this blade and the fang, because both are very sharp and have recently had poison on them, and take them to Potter Manor, leaving them on the desk?" "Yes, sir, Harry," the little elf said before popping away with both items. Harry then picked up the diary and returned to the infirmary. Like Dumbledore earlier, Professors McGonagall and Flitwick were also gone. Mr. Weasley was now standing alongside the bed of their daughter, with his now enervated wife on the opposite side. The green grasses, Sirius and Gran, were seeing to the girls. Gran was clearly waiting for a now-gone Neville to return. "I'm bad. Did you miss me?" he cheekily asked, walking over to stand alongside Daphne's bed. He then earned himself another round of hugs, this time from Isabel, Gran, Cygnus, and Sirius. He walked over to stand at the head of Daphne's bed, leaned down and kissed her on the lips. "I'm safe, sweetheart," he murmured to her. "You had nothing to worry about," before moving on to greet the other 2. At Hermione's bedside, he leaned in and kissed her of the forehead and said, "You did it, Hermione. You figured it out weeks before Neville, I, Susan, and Hannah did. And we have you and your research skills to thank for heading us in the right direction to find the chamber." "Here, Harry," said Sirius. He replied. "You know they can't hear you, right?" his godfather asked. "I know I've been told they can't hear me," he replied. "But how many other people have there ever been who have been petrified by a 1,000-year-old basilisk, and has given evidence to say whether or not they could hear or otherwise understand while being petrified?" "If," said Sirius. Harry just grinned at him. Mr. and Mrs. Weasley approached, and, with a very visible nudge from her husband, Mrs. Weasley said, "I apologize for trying to hug you earlier, Mr. Potter. It is clear to me now I could have gotten us both seriously hurt or killed because you had those items on your person at the time. However, now that I have calmed down from being a frantic mother, grateful her daughter had been rescued and was alive, may I give you a hug?" Harry smiled and said, "Apology accepted." And yes, with a beaming smile, Mrs. Weasley came forward and hugged him, backing off just as it was becoming uncomfortable. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Potter. My daughter is priceless to me, and my family. If there's anything we can do for you, please just ask." "The only thing I ask, actually, I pretty much demand it," said Harry, "is get Ginevra in to see a proper mind healer. She's going to need it." Both Weasley parents blushed and looked down. Mr. Weasley coughed and said, we can't." Understanding their embarrassment, Harry cut in and said, "As Neville and I saved her life, I hope you'll accept I don't want all that hard effort to go to waste. I'll organize a mind healer for her. You just need to make sure she goes to see him or her." "We can't accept charity," said Mrs. Weasley. "You said I was to tell you if there was anything you could do for me," he firmly said. "This is it. It will make me very happy if she receives proper mental care." Tom Riddle, the spirit that had her under thrall, told Neville and I what Ginevra had been writing in that diary. He bragged about how pitiful she sounded. I will not cause her further embarrassment by relaying it to you, but it was sufficient to convince me she needs this, so I'm going to pay for it. All right? Molly looked like she was still going to refuse, but Arthur said, "Thank you, Mr. Potter. I will ensure our daughter attends those appointments." After a few moments' hesitation, Mrs. Weasley said, "There's one other thing." "Yes?" he asked. "Ginny wonders if she can talk to you for a while," she replied. "She wants to thank you." "Of course," said Harry. He walked over to where the girl was lying on her side, looking absolutely miserable. He grabbed a stool and placed it on the side she was facing and sat down on it. "Hey, you," he greeted her. Ginevra burst into tears again, so Harry stood and bent over the bed, wrapping the girl in a hug. "I'm so sorry," she sobbed. "I nearly got everyone killed. I nearly got you, the famous Harry Potter, killed." "Ginevra! Ginny!" "Stop," said Harry. Once the sobbing subsided, he moved her back to lying in the bed and retook seat on the stool. "You are an 11-year-old girl who was tricked by a magical device designed to do exactly what it almost did to you. You didn't really stand a chance. But he was such a nice boy at first," she said. "I trusted him. It wasn't until it was too late I found out he was also Voldemort." Harry heard the Weasley parents gasp and thought he heard others. "I know," said Harry. "That is, or was, Voldemort's greatest power. When he wanted to, he was able to charm anyone out of practically anything, and that includes some of the wisest witches and wizards out there. He has practically everyone else, but not you and me, convinced he is a pure blood. But we know the truth, don't we?" With a bare hesitation, she nodded. "No, we know he is only a half-blood," he continued, "and that he's lied to everyone else about who he really is. We know Voldemort's real name is Tom Marvolo Riddle." She nodded again. She suddenly said, "Thank you for saving my life," and blushed before turning away. "You are most welcome," he replied. "But please remember that Neville Longbottom was also part of that. It was he who had the rooster to crow, and it was he who sent the one who calls himself Voldemort flying across the chamber with an overpowered, stunning charm when he was about to kill me, and he did it twice. So you should think about saying that to him too, all right?" She nodded and said, "All right." "Good," he said. "Now there's something you can do for me over summer. It's not a big thing, but it is an important thing." "All right?" "All right," she replied, looking a little happier. "To help you overcome the terrible year you've just had here at Hogwarts, your parents are allowing me to have you speak to someone about whatever is bothering you," he said. "So, whatever you were writing in that diary, you can now talk about with a real person who will really help you, rather than tell you lies like Riddle did. What I want you to do is write to me as often as you like over summer and tell me about both how those visits go and how much you're enjoying your summer. All right?" "I can do that," she said. "Thank you," he replied with a smile. "Now, if you will excuse me, Miss Weasley, there are other people demanding of my time today. I have yet to see Susan Bones or Hannah Abbott, and I expect they will want to kick my and Neville's bums for not coming and seeing them as soon as we brought you out of the chamber, to let them know we were all right." "All right, Harry. Thank you," she smiled. With a nod and smile in return, Harry gave her hand a gentle squeeze and went to move away. Suddenly, he stopped and moved back. "One last thing, Ginny," he said with his face showing curiosity. "Where on earth did you find that diary?" "It was in with my books when we got home from shopping for school supplies," she said. "In?" he asked. "Yeah, it was inside another book," she said. "A second-hand one my parents were able to buy for me." "Was it your Transfiguration book?" he asked. Yeah," she said. "How'd you know?" "You can think of it as just a guess," he replied. "Now I've really got to go." He smiled and moved away. Lord Malfoy, in the bookshop, with the Transfiguration book, thought Harry. Gotcha, and that explains Dobby. He returned to the adults to find Neville had returned and was dressed neatly in everyday casual wizarding robes without the outer robe. "Is it dinner time yet?" asked Harry, rubbing his hands together. "Slaying a 1,000-year-old basilisk has managed to make me build up an appetite." Neville snorted. Only you, Harry, would make such a remark, he said. Turning to the adults, he asked, I hope you're willing to join us for dinner. I'd like you to see what happens here when a Potter and Longbottom enter the Great Hall. Me? Stammered Neville. I think you mean you, Harry. Not any more, Nev, disagreed Harry. You just slayed a 30-plus-foot-long, 1,000-year-old basilisk one moment and crossed wands with Voldemort, kicking his ass the next twice. Gran gasped. Oh, said a surprised Neville. I did, didn't I? Harry grinned and one arm hugged his mate. The adults smiled, looked at each other, and Cygnus said, As long as you're inviting us, why not? With the adults following, Neville and Harry walking side by side into a now full great hall. As expected, the entire hall went silent. See, said Harry over his shoulder. Walking forward, Harry was looking around for where they'd be sitting when they saw Hannah and Susan rise from their seats at the Hufflepuff table and come running over. Susan grapple-hugged Harry while Hannah did the same with Neville. You bloody idiots, said Susan softly. Then the girls switched. Sirius, ever the wag, called out, Yes, yes, it is I, Lord Sirius Black, the ever-lovable. Looking up at the head table in the silent hall, Harry called, Headmaster, do we have room at table for a few guests? The old man smiled and magnanimously said, Of course, Mr. Potter. With a girl under an arm each, Neville and Harry walked over to the Hufflepuff table. They quietly made room for the extra 6 of them. Once they were all sitting and the noise of conversation renewed, Harry leaned over to his godfather and said, The whole hall going silent like that when we enter is what's been happening all year. When you enter, Harry, corrected Neville. Not any more, Nev, replied Harry with a grin. Expect your name to now be Neville Longbottom, Basilisk Slayer, and when we enter a room, it'll be, Hey, there's Neville Longbottom and his friend Harry. Gran sat up, proudly. As the meal wound to a close, one of the younger pups finally gathered up their courage and asked Harry, You really went into the Chamber of Secrets? Clearly Susan and Hannah had been talking with their housemates, at least. Yes, he replied. What was it like? Asked the pup. Big damp, dimly lit by torchlight. And scared the whoopies out of the both of us, he replied with a bit of a shrug. Neville snorted and said, Got that right. Harry could see those within hearing distance of what he said had gone quiet to listen. It's a long room, with pillars running down both sides just in from the walls. There's a snake motif going on throughout, and at the far end is this huge stone statue of Salazar Slytherin himself. The entrance to the chamber itself has a huge stone door barring entrance, and requires Parseltongue to open it. And the monster was a big basilisk. Yeah, Neville effectively killed it. I just administered the final killing blow to make sure it was dead. How big was it?
30 feet.
I think. Turning to Neville, he asked, Hey, Nev. Looking back, Neville asked, Yeah, Harry. The basilisk, said Harry. You had a better look at it than I did. How big was it, really? About 30 foot long, I think, he said with a shrug of his own. I just remember how big a mouth it had, said Harry. The thing could have easily swallowed a person whole. The strength in its body was pretty impressive, too, said Neville. It smashed to rock dust that pillar you were first standing behind and left big smashed holes when it rammed the walls, trying to get to you. But who was doing it? Who first opened the chamber? Hang on, said Harry. Turning to Neville, he said, You know, we're going to plagued with these questions over and over again. How about we just tell the story once to the student and staff body and get it out of the way? Yeah, replied Neville, understanding. That would be good. Harry stood and looked to the head table. As soon as the rest of the hall recognized Harry was standing, it went silent again. Yes, Mr. Potter? Asked the headmaster. Headmaster, he said, it has quickly become apparent to Neville and I that we will be near forever plagued by questions about what happened this afternoon. May I have permission to address the student body to explain? I don't think that would be wise, he started to reply before Biz was cut off by Cygnus standing. Let the boys tell it, Headmaster, said Cygnus. You know what he is saying is true. With a sigh and exaggerated weary slump of disappointment, the old man said, Very well, but please make it quick. Thank you, Headmaster, said Harry before looking at Neville. You too, come on. Neville nodded, and also stood, and both walked to stand in the area, in front of the head table. Headmaster, I believe this will go a lot quicker, which is what you said you want if we show this in a projector penchant. Very well, said the old man. Again, Harry quietly called, Petey, and the little elf popped in. Yes, Master Harry? Kneeling down, he gestured the elf forward and whispered, Can you get me my pensieve and a plinth for it to sit upon, please? The elf nodded and disappeared. A moment later, it returned with what Harry asked for next to him. Thank you, said Harry, and the elf popped away. Standing back up, Harry turned to the student body and said, Mr. Longbottom, Miss Bones, Miss Abbott, and I, with purpose, set about attempting to solve the year-long mystery of why and how students were being petrified. We also decided to search for the so-called Chamber of Secrets, as the two issues appeared to be tied together. Many of you have come across us over the past 3 weeks while we were engaged in that search. There were a few nodding heads among the students. Well, shortly after lunch, this afternoon, we found another message, daubed onto the wall underneath the original one. For those who don't already know, it says, Her skeleton will lie in the chamber forever. At that time, we were headed for the haunted bathroom on the 2nd floor. Miss Bones and Miss Abbott had the very clever idea to talk with the first victim. No, not Mrs. Norris, Myrtle Malone, moaning Myrtle. The girl killed when the chamber was last opened in May 1943. Neville took it up. With the message making it clear we were quickly running out of time, we spoke with Myrtle and she provided us with 3 very important pieces of information. One was the identity of the student opening the chamber and bringing the beast up into the castle. The second led us directly to the hidden entrance. The third confirmed what we believed the monster to be. It was a basilisk. That had quite a few gasps and talking from the students. But a basilisk kills when it looks at you, not petrifies you, called one older Ravenclaw. Yes, replied Neville, and solving why the victims were only petrified and not killed was part of the problem. However, we did just that too, said Harry. We discovered none of the victims were caught in the direct gaze of the basilisk. Mrs. Norris was drinking from the still water that was on the floor of the corridor. She saw the basilisk in the reflection of the water. Mr. Creevey was looking through the lens of his camera. Mr. Finch-Fletchley saw the basilisk through the misty form of Sir Nicholas. Sir Nicholas saw it direct, but as he's already dead, it only petrified him. And our 3 friends saw it through the reflection of a small handheld mirror Miss Granger was holding in her hand at the time. None of the living caught the direct gaze of the basilisk, and that of itself is nothing short of a miracle. It will also interest you to know, said Neville, that from both their positions when they were found petrified and by a note held in Miss Granger's hand at the time, the 3 of them had only just figured out that the monster was a basilisk. That is why they were looking around corners using a hand mirror before actually walking around the corner. It took me using parcel tongue to open the entrance, which is magically sealed, said Harry. So you can forget about trying to do it yourself. We sent Hannah and Susan to Professor McGonagall with what information we had in case we didn't come back. Neville and I had already, by this time, taken to carrying around a transfigured rooster each. They were transfigured into 2 ordinary blocks of wood. It is known that the crow of a rooster will kill a basilisk. So, armed with a transfigured rooster each, our wands, and a pair each of special mirror-surfaced sunglasses that should have only seen us petrified rather than killed by the basilisk's gaze. Harry held up his own pair. Neville and I went down the secret passage to the chamber. After quite a while of carefully walking, said Neville, we came upon a great stone door. Again, Harry had to use parcel tongue to open it, and we entered. We carefully made our way down the length of the chamber and found the unconscious body of a girl lying at the feet of a great stone statue of Salazar Slytherin himself. With me standing guard, continued Harry. Neville tried to rouse her. He could not. And no, I'm not going to say who it was, just yet, because she is pretty much blameless for what happened. The student was being held in thrall by a magical artifact, and was acting outside of her own control. Think of it as another form of the Imperious Curse, but much, much worse. There was the essence of another student there, until that time hidden, That student you've heard me name before. His name was Tom Riddle." "Mr. Potter," exclaimed Dumbledore, as the students whispered among themselves. "You're far too late, Headmaster," said Neville, turning to him. "They all already know of whom he's speaking, and have known for 3 weeks." Dumbledore looked very shocked and quite disturbed, but he didn't say anything more. Turning back to the students, Harry said, "That's right, folks. The same student who dobbed in Hagrid for opening the Chamber of Secrets in 1943 is the same one who opened it this time. So no doubt you can figure out who actually opened the chamber last time, yes?" Spirit Tom and I exchanged words, while Neville tried to help the unconscious student, and like all megalomaniacs, Tom liked to talk about how great he was. Then, once he finally shut his yap, he called forth the basilisk using parcel tongue. Here's what happened from there. Harry then concentrated on the memory of the battle up to them leaving the chamber, and used his wand to withdraw the memory. He dropped it into the basin of the pensieve and tapped the rune to make it project in the space above. As soon as it started, he enlarged it and enhanced the sound, so everyone could watch and hear. He and Neville moved off to the side. During the playing of the memory, the students gasped, shrieked, and gasped again in all the right spots. When Riddle identified himself as Voldemort while waiting for Harry to die, they received the biggest shrieks and gasps of the showing. When it finished, Harry withdrew the memory and dropped it into one of his ever-ready fields. Then he called Petey to take the pensieve back to Potter Manor. While he was doing that, Neville looked at the students and asked, "Any questions?" Everyone was looking at him and Harry in awe, and not the normal kind either. It was an awe of outright fear and respect. Said a Gryffindor. "Tom Riddle was really Vive Voldemort." That earned yet more gasps and shrieks. "No," replied Harry. "It would, however, be correct to say Voldemort, more gasps, is actually really named Tom Marvolo Riddle." Most on the Slytherin table were looking most unhappy about what they heard. "Mr. Potter," roared Dumbledore. "Oh, give it a rest, please, Headmaster," snarked Harry, turning to the old man. "Stop trying to keep it a secret. The truth will set you free, and in this case, the truth will set you free of the unjustified fear of the man." Turning back, Harry said, "Tom Marvolo Riddle was born the son of a near-squib witch named Merope Gaunt, and Tom Riddle, a muggle, not a muggle born, a muggle one with no magic whatsoever. So yes, folks, the one whose false name frightens you so much you can hardly bear to hear it is, or was, a half-blood." And that really upset the Slytherins. And Neville here, the person Mr. Malfoy and his cronies sneeringly calls a squib, crossed wands with him this afternoon and blasted him into a wall with nothing more than a simple stunning charm. Twice. That was only a spirit, or whatever it was, yelled one of the Slytherin upper years. "A spirit, you say?" asked Harry right back. "One that was able to hold Miss Weasley's wand in his hand, and who you saw cast magic through it, one that was affected by a simple stunning charm, one that when he actually hit the wall, hit with enough force to crack the rock wall behind him. No, he was solid enough, all right. Even an idiot could see that." Turning back to the rest of the students, he asked, "Some of you over the past 3 weeks have gone to the trophy room to look for the information I provided you about Riddle before, yes?" There were quite a few nods and yeses in reply. "And that other student in the memory looked exactly like him in the photograph, yes?" More nods. "Well, now for the final proof," said Harry. With a wave of his wand and a muttered "flag rate," Harry wrote to Marvolo Riddle in the air in shimmering fire. He swished his wand and the letters began to rearrange themselves, finishing with "I am Lord Voldemort." There were quite a few gasps and much whispering. Dumbledore sat there with his head down and muttering to himself. He really wasn't happy. He left it there for a few seconds before swishing his wand through the words and extinguishing the flames. "I'm sure none of you now doubt the veracity of my words," he calmly asked. No one replied. Even the very unhappy Slytherins couldn't rebut. After the dinner entertainment, Harry and Neville escorted the adults out to the front steps of the castle. Harry drew the memory of the period when he was talking with Riddle's spirit and dropped it into another file and capped it before handing it to Cygnus. "I think I need to hand this off before Dumbledore sticks his broken beak in and tries to demand it off me," said Harry. "I'll have a look tonight, Harry," he said, We all want to be back here tomorrow morning, for when Daphne and the others are woken, I'll be bringing the Daffys and Grangers with me." "Oh," asked Harry, "I didn't think the Grangers would be able to see the castle, let alone enter it." "They'll be wearing special pendants that will allow them in and able to see," smiled Cygnus. "Thank you," sighed Harry. "I'm sure Hermione will be very happy to see them when she wakes up." "As am I," he said. With words of parting, the adults left on the long walk back to the main gates before apparating away. Curfew was fast approaching, so Harry and Neville headed upstairs to their respective towers. Both were absolutely knackered and were looking forward to sleep. When Harry entered the Ravenclaw common room, the few students in there looked up at him with wary acceptance. One of the older Muggleborns quietly said, "You wear a pair of big brassy ones, Mr. Potter." Harry just grinned back with a weary expression. "I was scared nearly enough to shite myself for almost the whole time, but I also knew, as the only Parselmouth I knew of, I had to be at least one of the ones that had to go down there." "That's what makes it all the more impressive," the older boy said. "You're more than intelligent enough to also be rightfully afraid, yet you still did it, and came out victorious." "Well," said Harry, "thank you. I just think we were incredibly lucky, and am thankful we were able to save the young Griff girl." The older boy just nodded. Over in the Gryffindor tower, Neville had just managed to remember the password and had clambered over the sill before he was grabbed and had the stuffing almost hugged out of him. First it was Ron Weasley who hugged him. Then they were joined by the twins, who proceeded to bounce them up and down. When he was finally released, the oldest brother, Percy, with tears in his eyes, arm-clasped him before giving a very quick and manly one-armed hug. "Thank you," croaked the older boy. "Thank you for saving my sister's life." Blushing, Neville replied, "Yeah, that's all right, yeah." "Neville Longbottom," cried one twin. "Basilisk Slayer," cried the other. "Rescuer of damsels in distress," cried the first. "Defeater of he who must not be named in battle. Cross him at your peril. A Gryffindor's Gryffindor." "That's enough," barked Percy, before they went any further. "The poor boy must be exhausted." "I am," said Neville quietly. "I'm heading for bed. I want to be up early for when our friends are revived." "Then we bid you good night," said the first. "Sir Neville of Longbottom," said the second. Then both bowed deeply with opposite and matching gestures towards the stairs up to the boys' dorms. Neville gave a little snort of tired amusement before trudging up the stairs. Both he and Harry were asleep when their respective heads hit their pillows. Neither of them knew their dorm mates stayed as quiet as they could in their own preparations for bed. Both boys met in the infirmary with Susan and Hannah, and with the adults, early the next morning before breakfast. Both looked as if they needed more sleep. Cygnus, Isabel, and Sirius were joined by Edmund and Petra Davis, Wendell and Monica Granger, Aunt Amelia, and two of her Auras. Aunt Amelia and her two Auras were off to one side with Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall. She clearly wasn't happy with either of them. With 5 petrified patients plus the cat and the ghost, it would have made for a crowded room if it wasn't so large. Madame Pomfrey walked in a short time later with Professor Snape, who was carrying a rack of 6 identical potion phials. They were followed by caretaker Filch, who was looking a little anxious. "Well, it seems we'll be having a bit of an audience today, Severus," she said, a little surprised by the size of the crowd. The potions master just muttered something under his breath. "We'll be starting with Mrs. Norris," she said in her no-nonsense manner, heading for where the cat was hidden behind a screen in the corner. It looked like a couple of the parents were about to object, but they decided against it when they were cut off by dual glares from the healer and potions master. From experience, they clearly knew the middle-aged witch was not to be trifled with when treating patients. The screen was removed, and Snape set his phial rack down on one of those patient-wheeled tables. With her wand drawn and pointing at the throat of the cat, she carefully massaged the muscles around the throat, while Snape gently tipped a small amount of the potion down into its mouth. It took a little while, but the cat began to stir. Soon it was moving freely. A little while later, Madame Pomfrey picked the cat up and offered it to a hurrying over Argus Filch, who accepted it with grateful sobs and thank yous. He moved out of the way while cradling the cat in his arms, whispering to it with tears in his eyes. Midiwitch and Potions Master then moved to young Colin. This time it took a little longer, and the entire potion before he stirred, but his skin tone had returned, and he was breathing easily by the time the two moved on. Next were Justin, then Hermione, Tracy, and finally Daphne. By the time Daphne was being administered the mandrake draught, Colin was sitting up in bed and looking around. Suddenly the boy exclaimed, "It's a ruddy great big snake!" Madame Pomfrey moved over to him, as Snape gave one last general sneer to everyone before sweeping out of the infirmary with robes billowing. "Hush, Mr. Creevey," the media witch said to the boy. "We know, and it's been dealt with." "Oh, good," the boy said, before he suddenly blurted, "What time is it? I'm going to be late for class." Harry couldn't help it. He laughed. Others joined in with their own giggles or snickers. It was up to Professor McGonagall to tell the boy just how long he'd been out of it. Daphne was just starting to stir when young Colin called out, "7 months, and then I missed Christmas?" Dumbledore was talking to Finch Fletchley. "How much schooling did I miss?" the boy asked. "Where are my parents? They must be frantic." "That's actually a very good question, young man," said Cygnus. "I'll say," said the boy. Dumbledore looked quite abashed. He muttered something to Finch Fletchley. The boy replied, "I don't bloody care who you think you are. You're not my parents. I want to see my parents." "Me too," said Colin. "Well, Albus," said Cygnus, "you'd best go get them. You'll notice we brought the Grangers to see their daughter." Harry looked across and could see Hermione was quietly sobbing in her parents' arms. Neville went over to them. With another of his disappointed grandfather sighs, the old man asked both boys for the address of their respective parents and left the room. "I've missed so much school," wailed Hermione. While he had his hand gently brushing her hair back from her face, Daphne opened her eyes. "Hey, you," he quietly said. "Hey," she quietly said. "I'm guessing 3 weeks?" "Yeah," he replied before bending down and kissing her. She smiled back. "I'll leave you with your parents for a bit," he said. "I need to go talk to my protectee." She nodded with a smile. Harry went around to see Hermione on the opposite side of the bed from her parents and said, "Hey, you!" She turned to look at him and then spun about to fling her arms around him. "Harry," she cried. "It's a basilisk, Harry, and a bloomin' big one." "We know," said Harry, easing her away. "Neville and I dealt with it." With a gobsmacked expression on her face, she asked, "What do you mean by you dealt with it?" "Neville and I went down into the Chamber of Secrets and killed it," said Harry, smiling. "Harry James Potter," she barked. "Neville Francis Longbottom." Harry backed up a bit and grinned at Neville, who was grinning just as much back. "Yeah, she's better," he snickered. "Yeah, all 3 names," chuckled Harry back. "You could have been killed," she yelled at them. "You should have let the professors handle it." "Well, Hermione," said Harry, holding up his hands. It took a parcel mouth to get in, and time was of the essence. "Yeah," said Neville, "there was a damsel in distress who would have died had we not gone down." Looking at Neville, Harry quirked an eyebrow and asked, "Damsel in distress?" before thinking about it for a few moments. He shrugged and said, "Yeah, actually that's about right." "You 2 idiots!" she barked. "Hey, that's what Susan called us," said Neville. The girl in question came over and said, "I did too." "Look, Hermione," said Harry to the angry girl, "I'll let you yell at Neville some more. I'll be with Daphne." "Hey," complained Neville, "what happened to where a Longbottom goes a Potter will be by his side?" "That's the future Lady Potter over there, Nev," replied Harry, pointing his finger to Daphne. "Then I'd best come with," he happily said. They'd taken only a few steps when Daphne called, "Yes, it's my turn to yell at you." The adults around her bed separated to allow Daphne to see them both. Cygnus and Sirius were both sporting wide grins. Daphne, however, was not. Both boys stopped dead in their tracks. They looked at each other, and Neville said, I think breakfast is about to be served in the Great Hall." "Good idea, Nev," replied Harry happily. "We'd best go then." "What?" scoffed Daphne. "You have no problem facing a 30-foot basilisk that can kill you just by looking at you, but you won't face me." Both boys looked at each other again before turning back and saying in stereo, "Hell yes." While it amused the adults by the look on her face, it clearly didn't amuse Daphne. "Get over here, you two," she growled. With heads hanging and attempting to ooze contriteness, both boys moved to stand each side of her bed. As Hermione said, she said, "You two idiots. It was not your job to go charging in like silly Gryffindors." "Hey," said Neville, "just because some girl might have been in danger." "We were prepared," said Neville. "Yeah, we had these roosters transfigured as blocks of wood," said Harry. "And it took a simple magic-cancelling charm to transfigure them back. Plus, we had a pair each of my mirror sunglasses for our eyes, and the note Hermione had said a simple rooster's crow would kill the thing. So all we had to do was not look at it eye to eye while we transfigured the wood back to roosters, and just let the roosters crow within its hearing range." "Is that what happened?" she ominously asked. No. And what did happen?" she quietly asked with a bit of a growl. You'd best watch the memory your father has." "Yes, that would be best. We may muck up the telling of it, but the memory doesn't lie." "You two are starting to sound like the Weasley twins," she said, calmer now. "Now that's just," said Harry. "Wrong," said Neville, before they both grinned at each other. "Comedians, the pair of you," she huffed. From where he was leaning on a spare bed, Sirius was trying not to laugh so much he was crying. Cygnus wasn't far off, either, and Isabel was trying to glare at the two boys in support of her eldest daughter, but had her lips pursed like she was sucking on an unripened persimmon. From the next bed over came the voice of Tracy. "Do I get to yell at them now?" Both boys glanced at each other for a few moments, then ran out the door. It would have been a photo finish as to which one made it out first. "Cowards!" Tracy yelled after them amidst laughter. "Imagine what they'd have been like," mused Sirius. "If they'd grown up together?" asked Cygnus. "Now, don't you two start," said Isabel. Both men laughed even harder.